pelvic floor PTs now say the pelvic floor of a woman coming out of the purity culture movement looks similar to the pelvic floor of survivors of sexual assault.
Wow.
How tense the pelvic floor is and levels of dyspareunia. And that's pretty significant.
Hi there, you're listening to the Kingdom Sexuality podcast. We're Alana, Kyle, and Tira, friends who have a heart for intimacy and long to uncover God's truth and design for sexual freedom within marriage. If you enjoy listening to our episodes or like our content over on Instagram, would you consider leaving a review or subscribing? It really helps. Welcome here. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Kingdom Sexuality podcast. I'm Alana, and I'm joined by Kyle and Tira as per usual, but we also have a special guest today, so I will introduce her in a second. Special welcome to the patrons who are listening. If you are keen to also support the show and get behind-the-scenes information and all the other good perks that are over on Patreon, head to patreon.com/kingdomsexuality, and that's where you will find all that good stuff. The verse for today is Psalms 34, verse 5. Those who look to him are radiant. Their faces are never covered with shame. So before we dive into it here, we're going to listen to a quick ad from one of our sponsors. So thanks for taking the time to listen. It costs you nothing, but it helps us out. So appreciate you listening. Today, we are joined by Ashley Hudson, who is a licensed therapist, founder of Pearl and Process Counseling. Ashley specializes. Wow. Ashley specializes.
Please leave this in.
We're just having a good start.
Please do.
Specializes in helping individuals and couples navigate lasting effects of trauma, purity culture, and shame around sexuality. She's passionate about guiding people towards healing, wholeness, and freedom in their relationships. And I personally am super excited to be chatting about this today. Because Ashley, I don't know if you know, but purity culture, and that is part of my story. And navigating through that once I was married played a huge role in even the creation of Kingdom Sexuality and just navigating that and breaking free of sort of purity culture chains, so to speak, like without realizing that that's what it was at the time. So yeah, I'm really excited to dive into this with you today. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Before we go into this too deeply, for people who are listening, they're like, I don't even know what purity culture is. Would you be able to just give us a brief overview on what that even is?
Yeah, so it's defined kind of differently depending on who you talk to. But overall, it was my particular research centers the purity culture movement, which was in the late 90s, early 2000s. Some would argue it still exists today. Others you talk to will say, actually, the first purity movement was in 1920s. So it really depends who you talk to. But my research primarily focuses on those who were experiencing really purity discourse during the late 90s, early 2000s. And that was a movement. The narrative that kind of went with it was abstinence before heterosexual marriage. If you wait to have sex until you are married, they made sweeping promises. So it was kind of like a prosperity gospel, a sexualized prosperity gospel, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
If you have sex, some authors claimed you would have fertility. Some claimed you would have like ultimate wellness and happiness in your marriage. And you would have great hot sex in your marriage that continues to give you life, until the day you die. And what happened for a lot of folks coming out of this movement is that didn't happen for them. Either they got married and were super disappointed, looking around thinking, where are the fireworks, which is what I hear a lot from my clients and folks I talk with. And then others experienced physical pain, which was not only where are the fireworks, but were even more sorrowful and grief of like, what have I done? Or struggled with fertility, and were really let down by this prosperity kind of mindset that came with the purity culture. And so that's really what we look at. There's more to it. There were kind of rigid gender roles that were really prescribed. There was a premarital rhetoric around not having sex or giving yourself away or becoming damaged goods. And then we have a postmarital rhetoric and discourse that also went with purity culture, which was you need to have sex every 72 hours or your partner is going to leave you or become really angry and potentially abusive. I've heard the gamut. So really depends. A lot of people will talk about the impact of that premarital script, and the focus of a lot of my work is the postmarital script and the impact of all of it on the human soul. And it is deep and hard to work with and really sad.
Yeah. Seriously. So thinking of someone who maybe went through that, like even myself, what, like for you, what are the common struggles you see couples navigating if they were kind of shaped by purity culture?
A lot of physical pain. So we're having pelvic floor PTs now say the pelvic floor of a woman coming out of the purity culture movement looks similar to the pelvic floor of survivors of sexual assault.
Wow.
In how tense the pelvic floor is and levels of dyspareunia and that's pretty significant. So if we just start with the physical ramifications of the movement itself and how those beliefs were internalized in women, I'm working a lot with that, with the pain, with the vaginismus, the I'm broken, something must be wrong with me. Most disturbingly, only half, according to some research, of women who experience pain during sexual intercourse report that pain to their partners. So there's this deep-seated shame that if my partner finds out that this is painful or something's going wrong, then they will leave or they'll no longer be satisfied, which is really scary. And in my work, especially scary because I center postpartum women. So they're really not wanting to be left alone with a vulnerable baby for lots of reasons. So yeah, I'm working because that's my population. I'm seeing a lot of that kind of coming up. And also really the rigidity, just the like black and white thinking, all or nothing thinking, sex means P and V, sex means this and that, and really working to broaden that story to help people kind of further encompass what sexual satisfaction and pleasure
I have a question
for them.
How does that work? How does purity culture go from this, I guess, psychological thing to this physiological response in the pelvic floor? Like, what is that connection? How does that happen?
Well, the pelvic floor is made pretty early on in utero, right? So when we think about it, the vagus nerve and the way our brains regulate our nervous system is very intricately wired together with our pelvic floor. So when a human is scared and goes into fight or flight, the pelvic floor shuts down pretty quickly, right? Our pelvic floor muscles are designed to shut down when we're in a threat state. And when sex itself is wired together neurologically as a threat, which for those who grew up during pivotal developmental stages like adolescence are wiring together sexual arousal itself as a representation of trauma or danger, it leads an advancement of a husband or a partner in a marriage to subconsciously elicit this response of trauma, of danger. Subconsciously, it's not something people can really, are reasoning through and even present to all of the time. So the pelvic floor, and we know, do you guys have kids? Like when you have kids, they're constantly, when they discover their genitals, it's like they're constantly down there regulating their little nervous systems. We have actually data from in utero, a 36-week-old fetus that masturbated to orgasm. I don't even really like using that word for children, but they manipulated their genitals until you can see in utero they were on ultrasound that they put themselves to sleep and were regulated. And so it's very primally wired into the system that the pelvic floor can be used to comfort and regulate a nervous system, but it's also your first place of defense if you're under threat.
No, that's a great answer. That
So
makes a lot of sense. I guess
question,
you don't need to procreate when you just need to stay alive. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Right. Yeah.
So you were saying you've been looking at postpartum women more specifically. Why postpartum?
So I'm a perinatal mental health specialist by trade. So I've predominantly, my whole practice has been spent working with moms who are struggling emotionally with postpartum depression or anxiety or another perinatal mood or anxiety disorder. So that's been the focus. I also serve mostly folks coming from religious contexts and faith environments. And so that set me up a lot to be working with women who are coming out of this movement, particularly. Not all. I do have some clients who come from backgrounds that are not religious and unchurched environments. And I was really noticing a difference when it came to these folks re-engaging their sexual selves in the postpartum period. Some people were not having difficulty at all, and some people were having a tremendous amount of difficulty. And I wanted to understand what the difference was, like why some people were not struggling as much, or I had an easier time as a clinician helping them through, and why others were having a harder time. So actually, my research is on the resiliency factors associated with sexually satisfied postpartum women who came through this movement. So I looked at, it was more of a strength-based perspective. I wanted to see what are the resiliency factors and how come some women are highly sexually satisfied. And I felt like the postpartum period is a really vulnerable one. And I wasn't sure why I was seeing so many sexual issues surface during this period of time. It was kind of what I least expected. I thought we would be working more with just relationship with partner, mood, anxiety, or depression. It turns out it's kind of all connected. And, the Lord has wired within our marriage this beautiful sexual union that was constantly getting attacked. And it seemed like I was constantly working with partners on how to overcome barriers in this area. So learning about the resiliency factors has set me up to better understand what strings I can kind of pull on and places I can camp out with folks so that we can get them through successfully.
Can you keep going on this and tell us more about your research and your conclusions and all that?
More of your,
Yeah. So I essentially did a reflexive thematic analysis. So I'm a qualitative researcher, which if you've heard of like Brene Brown, she does qualitative research. It simply means that you're focusing on words and content surrounding narrative rather than numbers. What I did was I put out a screener, the sexual satisfaction scale for women, and I had folks take this screener. And then the top 8 and the bottom 8, I wanted to interview. Top scoring would mean they were highly sexually satisfied in their relationship. Low scoring means that they lacked a lot of sexual satisfaction in their relationship. So I wanted to interview these two groups, do separate thematic analysis, which just means notice the themes that come up in each of these categories of folks. And then I wanted to compare the themes to be able to understand what was the resiliency, what was the difference between these two groups. So that is kind of what my research centered on. So ultimately each, like the top and bottom scores each had 5 themes. So in total there were 10 themes. And then I compared each theme one by one. So we can walk through those themes if you want. I don't know.
We want all the details.
Let's do it.
Yeah. This is so interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Totally. So there were 5 different categories as well: relationship description, motherhood, resilience process, physical impact attributed to the postpartum movement, and internalization of the beliefs. So for the relationship description, what I thought was really interesting was those who were a part of my low scoring group showed a splintering between emotional intimacy and sexual intimacy. So these folks were highly emotionally connected with their partners, but were deeply unsatisfied sexually. And I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah.
Because in a lot of our work as couples therapists, especially, we're focusing on rebuilding friendship. These folks didn't need to rebuild friendship. They were clearly best friends and they were very connected. And the only way the more I studied my transcripts and got to know the stories of these individuals and couples, it seemed as though there was almost an overcompensation for emotional intimacy during dating because there was no physical contact. Right. So they spent a lot of time cultivating an emotional connection, which is really beautiful. However, As a sex therapist, we know that when there's too much familial connection, it begins to resemble brother, sister, or parent, child. And that completely, it's like a wet blanket on the erotic. It is not going to foster hot, fun, sexy sex. It's going to make it really hard. So that is one of my thoughts or ideas behind that theme of why we could be seeing that. For the high scoring group, they had a ton of relational safety and open and honest communication that was ongoing. What was different was that there was some differentiation of self. So they were definitely one. However, there wasn't, in the Christian culture, what I find is that there's almost a sanctified fusion. Like when we become one, these two individuals just, become one ball of love and they lack individual identities. And that was not God's design, right? Like we're supposed to be two independent thinkers who come together in union. And especially for women socialized in the postpartum or in the purity culture movement, they learned to act without a sense of autonomy psychologically. They learned to act without agency in these ways because they were indifferent depending on the cultures. It wasn't really allowed or promoted for women to like have that independent thought. And again, it depends really on which, I had people who are highly fundamentalist that I was interviewing coming from environments where Christian domestic discipline was still supported, meaning men could punish their wives if they made mistakes, like physically punish them. And then I had, your more mainstream evangelical kind of person I was interviewing. And I had those who had left the church and deconstructed altogether or identified as spiritual but not religious. So you got to understand I was working with a pretty broad population in my sample. But what I saw being resiliency was within these couples, they grew together. There was ongoing discourse around, here's what I'm thinking. Here's a belief that I'm starting to get curious and question a little bit. And they allowed one another to have that autonomy of thought while growing together as one. So they had independence and they continually came together, honoring one another's independence and also honoring their unity as a couple. So that was kind of the relational trend I saw. As far as motherhood goes, what I thought was really powerful was a lot of women were kind of covertly utilizing birth and postpartum to reclaim a voice and a sense of agency. So for a lot of women, they had existed within different cultures and communities that told them what they wanted to do, what they would be doing was becoming a mother and a wife. And for many of them, this was the first point that they had a passionate desire to obviously protect the life within them, but also were starting to make decisions around their birth process and what, they wanted for their postpartum season. So for one of my participants, they actually said, I felt like the purity culture, I came out of that and felt such disappointment and disillusionment in my marriage that I just stopped trusting systems altogether because I'm so afraid of coercion. So for me, the best and only way I could do this birth was at home. So that was an example, just one example from many of my transcripts of someone reclaiming their voice and agency and autonomy in the process. Motherhood also served as a catalyst for sexual re-education, redefinition of sexual satisfaction, and embodied liberation. And I'll explain that because it sounds like a lot of biblical. The sexual re-education, I can't tell you the amount of women I've worked with who have birthed a person and been like, I don't know that I've ever actually looked at genitals before because they're changing diapers and they're up close and personal with the human body. And they're like, wow, they're learning for the first time. And then they're starting to wrap their head around, oh my gosh, the last thing I want to do is teach my kid what I learned through purity culture because it's led me to an unsatisfied sexual experience. I want to do something different, but I don't know what to do. So many of them are starting to access resources to re-educate themselves, honestly, on what sexual health is so that they can ultimately educate their little ones, which was really cool to see. And then a redefinition of sexual satisfaction. We all know, especially post-vaginal birth, but even post-cesarean, we are abstaining from sexual intercourse, which for most people coming from this movement, that is what sex is. It's P&V intercourse. End of story. And being able to, that's why postpartum is a great opportunity for folks to broaden that definition of what sexual, experiences mean. Maybe it's just laying together. Maybe it's, just kissing, coming up, broadening that kind of access to pleasure. And for women who did birth, they feel really powerful in their bodies. They're suddenly really in tune with what their bodies can do. So I just found a new sense of embodiment, meaning being present in their bodies and aware of the power of their bodies to not only function and serve those around them, but to experience pleasure and sensation. And that was really powerful for a lot of my high scoring folks. So do you have any questions about that one before I move on to resilience?
I don't think so. That all makes sense, I think.
To me, it's wild because this is like so much of like, I mean, maybe you guys would know this from like me sharing my story, but to me, I think I can like see the way you're talking. And it was like after I had my first child that then I think it was like this, like feeling so empowered and so like astonished that my body could do that. And then having this like, okay, when we can have sex again, like something's got to change. And I don't know what it was about it that did change after I had my first child, but that's completely accurate for me.
Story.
Yeah.
So in my dissertation, I discovered this term called matrescence during my research, which is a term coined in 1975, but it means becoming a mom, the process of becoming a mom. So becoming a mom is like not just an overnight experience, it's like a process. And it rhymes with adolescence because they were starting to see so many similarities between the developmental stage of adolescence and the maternal brain. Now, fast forward to this current time, they're able to they have brain scans that show that the same neural activity is going on in the same regions of the brain during adolescence as during the matrescence period, postpartum. And so I began to really think about this particular category in a new way after reading that research, because it is like an adolescent redo. And I think that's why the postpartum period is so valuable, because there's so much potential to help people overcome these narratives that the enemy is using to destroy marriages and destroy people's sexual thriving, to redeem and restore and claim life back into those places. And I just think that's so powerful. So, yeah.
And how, if women know that, I feel like in the process of becoming a mom, especially in the earlier days, you really feel like, what's the word? It's not like the time is wasted, but you feel like, oh, I can't do anything. I'm so tired. I can't like this. I'm just surviving. But it's like, well, actually, no, my brain is actually learning. We're learning new things and new skills and new, like there's a purpose in this. It isn't just to raise a human being, but it's also a whole time of growth that's going to be valuable for me coming up, even if you don't feel like you're learning. Yeah, it's a good way to think about it.
Renegotiation of roles, peers, all of it. It's very similar to what you go on.
What was your scale again? What did you call it? Like high and low what?
Sexual satisfaction scale for women. So it's abbreviated the SSSW. It's by really smart people, Meston and Trapnell. They've since come up with a few other versions of it for men and other folks who, because this one, the tool I used was a little bit older. It was one of their first measures they came out with, but it's just a way to quantify sexual satisfaction.
In your research, what was your sample size? Like what was N?
97 were the amount that I interviewed and screened. And then from there, I had hoped to get 8 and 8, but I ended up having to call it at 8 and 7. So I had 8 high scoring, 7 low scoring.
All right, keep going.
Yeah, because we haven't made it through all 5, right?
No, we're getting close though. With the resilience process. The low scoring group, social observation and help seeking catalyze cognitive and theological flexibility. And then the high scoring group, curiosity and cognitive flexibility, are reflexive pathways to sexual satisfaction. So to summarize, cognitive flexibility is a term we use a lot in the therapeutic space. And it simply means being able to see a belief, a thought, or a situation from multiple perspectives. So when I'm working with clients and I'm trying to foster cognitive flexibility, which is not a natural thinking pattern for someone coming from a more religious or rigid background, I will have them drive a different way to work every day, or write with a non-dominant hand, or I'll pick up an object like a pen and say, okay, we're going to set a timer for a minute. Let me know all the different things you can do with this pen. So it's kind of creating new synapses in the brain that can help you think through a variety of ways or a variety of perspectives surrounding a belief system. So for these individuals who I interviewed, the ability to put distance between, which for many of them, this happened in college when they began to see, oh, I'm one flavor of Christian. Here are 10 other flavors of Christian. Or when they began to see hypocrisy, when they find out, oh, my parents were sleeping together for years before they got married. Like, what in the world? How come? You know?
Right.
So observing that hypocrisy or noticing variety really began fostering an opportunity for them to become curious rather than judgmental and think more creatively around and reframe thinking of different perspectives on problems. So that ended up supporting sexual satisfaction. The folks I interviewed who were able to think from multiple angles about sexual practices or convictions or beliefs, not without conviction. Many of them did still hold conviction and still did practice their faith, were able to experience more sexual satisfaction simply from being more curious than judgmental. And that was powerful. As far as the physical impact of the purity culture movement, what I saw with the low scoring group was discrepancies in education were influential in their postpartum experiences, which is not surprising because for a lot of the women I worked with and that I interviewed, their lack of education made it really difficult for them to tell their provider what was wrong. We know that very few women actually speak up about sexual discomfort in their offices with their providers, and women from conservative and religious environments are far more likely to go silent through those spaces if they show up at all. Only 40% of women even show up to their postpartum visits. So a lot of the women aren't even talking about their difficulties in the postpartum season, especially. So that discrepancy in education really did influence how and when they accessed care and support for recovering. 85.7% of women who birth experience dyspareunia during intercourse after childbirth, which is a huge number.
Define that before we move on.
Those who
for people
had
who don't know what that is.
Yes, dyspareunia is painful, is pain with intercourse. So it's just general pain with intercourse. And women who experienced, first of all, women from high religious or conservative environments are far more likely to experience pain with intercourse than their non-religious counterparts. And we've known that since the 70s. Masters and Johnson discovered that a long time ago, but more research has been replicated.
Did that differentiate at all between like pain and discomfort? Because isn't there an aspect where it's kind of like expected that the first time after you have a baby is probably maybe not going to be the most comfortable?
Yes. So they did differentiate. Essentially what they did was look at 18 months postpartum, 6 months postpartum, 3 months postpartum, and kind of go that way through their measurements. So we know that 85.7% experienced discomfort at 3 months postpartum. So it wasn't just that first time I'd have to go back and look at the article. But we also know that those who experienced pain before birth have a 3 to 4 times more likely chance of experiencing pain at 18 months postpartum, which is far into the postpartum period. And the moms that I interviewed, some of them had been experiencing pain for years, and they didn't even know that it was possible to experience sexual intercourse without pain, which is so sad. It's heartbreaking. So the high scoring individuals, the theme was from pain to pleasure, naming sexual pain through relational and clinical support promotes sexual satisfaction. So these women were able to name what was going on, and their provider was then able to say like, oh, no, that's not a typical experience. Here's what we would expect instead. And give them some tools. Many of them also worked with their partners. Their partners went with them to PT. They were part of the process of healing scar tissue. So there was a lot of partnership and really sweet healing work going on for those folks. And then for the internalization of purity culture messages, the low scoring group, sanctified sexual suppression, contributes to internalization of shame, erasure, self erasure, and anxiety. So, really, this is speaking to that internalization of if you have sex, did you guys have object lessons? Like, if someone who has sex is like a rose that's been passed around or gum that's been chewed or whatever. So when you think about it, telling an adolescent that is really a lot. And that has implications for when they grow up and become sexually active, whether they're married or not. These beliefs really do become internalized and, like we talked about before, become wired together with the pelvic floor in pretty powerful ways because we're social creatures. Our brains are neurologically wired to ensure we belong before anything else. And belonging is of utmost importance to the adolescent population. So if you say this is what you have to do to belong, what a difficult position we put those kiddos in. And I'm not saying, a lot of people will say, so what is your solution? You think all these children should just be out there sexually active? Obviously not. But there could be maybe some better rhetoric we use than chewed gum and damaged cars or whatever. Yes. So because we do see that internalization of shame, which is I'm bad. I'm experiencing arousal. I'm bad. Not I'm experiencing arousal. Oh, cool. I'm human. That's a really normal thing. Self-erasure. A lot of women, especially, were socialized to kind of blend in, be quiet and subservient. And that, especially within the bedroom, because so much of the dialogue was really, you need to satisfy your husband to keep him around, involved a normalizing of her erasure of pleasure. So not knowing, many of the people I work with are really intimidated to even say the word pleasure. Or that one of my interviewees was like, I don't think I can talk about my sexual pleasure. That feels wrong. So that kind of speaks to the self-erasure in the bedroom specifically, and anxiety. So just feeling overall anxious about and conflicted, which of course they have all of these messages wired into their nervous system. Why would they not feel conflicted? For my high scoring people, that internalization of sexual shame and pressure and anxiety ultimately led them to a place of really thoughtful deconstruction and reconceptualization of sexual pleasure. So they didn't just deconstruct a sexual ethic or conviction and like wander into the wilderness. There was also a rebuilding process of reconceptualizing what sexual pleasure means. For instance, some people would say, before I was married, I thought sexual pleasure meant I had an orgasm every time we had sex. And then for many of them, they were like, now I don't really need that or always want that. I just want to be near my partner. So that's an example of that. So that covers all 5 categories, looking down from far away. But yeah,
wow.
That's kind of where I came out.
So interesting. So interesting.
Some of my colleagues are really starting to look at, there's a purity culture research collective, and we all research different aspects of the purity culture movement. And some of them are beginning to look at the impact of the purity culture on men specifically.
I was going to ask about that because I'm curious, because we've definitely had messages from people before that are saying, well, my husband actually would identify more closely with this purity culture stuff than I would. And so it's tricky because I don't have that experience in my own marriage. Like, I'm the woman who went through it, but what advice, or like, how does a man navigate that as opposed to a woman?
Yeah. I don't know that I haven't done enough research to be able to confidently say it would be different or it would be the same. I think ultimately a lot of what I do with couples and individuals is rewriting scripts. So what did you learn about your body? What did you learn about other people's bodies? And what did you learn about sex? And I'll have them write a timeline, each of them, starting from like birth to now, of different events that happened. And rewriting those scripts based on values rather than rigid rules is kind of where I begin with all people, despite what bodies they're in. Because I think that ultimately we're all very similar in the way that our nervous system is wired together with our pelvic floor. I think it's harder for men. We're not getting as much data from men because They've been socialized to not talk about their feelings, and especially not talk about their genitals unless it's a prideful or like boasting thing. So there's just not common for men to come out. It's changing from what I heard. I was just talking to a pelvic floor PT the other day that said a lot of men are coming in now because apparently, I don't know, someone in the New York Times, there was like an article somewhere that of men talking about their pelvic floors. And so now everyone's getting support. So I think it's becoming more normal, but yeah, it's very different in some regard.
How would you summarize like a person that would score well in your research and a person that would score low in your research? Like, how would you summarize what those women look like? Like, who are those women?
So a lot of my sample were white women from the US, English speaking, highly educated. So my sample is not generalizable, doesn't create generalizable data in the sense that we're looking at a very narrow demographic, right? Almost all of them, like above 90% in each category, identified as Christian. So we are also looking at folks who are still saying that they identify as Christian. For those in my high scoring category, I will say there were less Christians than in my low scoring, although still the majority were identifying as Christian. Also within my high scoring population, which is important to note, they were about 3 months ahead of the game postpartum wise. So I think they were on average 11 months postpartum, where my low scoring group was 8 months postpartum or so. So there was definitely a discrepancy there that could be influencing
8 months and 11 months what?
Results, right? Postpartum.
That's
when
they
okay,
did
gotcha.
Yeah. So they were in a different place.
Further along.
But for my low scoring group overall, many of them still operated, and this is an observation, not a personal stance, that in very rigid gender roles. So she's going to opt out of work and stay home. She's now a housewife. He's a provider. Kind of ways of going about things. Where with my high scoring group, I think I saw a little bit more flexibility around that, rewriting gendered scripts in the sense of, we're both working, we're both going to tag team, more mind share when it came to housework and responsibilities for the children. I pretty much saw, I think almost all of those women were working at least part-time. And in general, we have research showing that women who are older and who are working professionally, have children, are more sexually satisfied than those who are not working, which I thought was really interesting.
So interesting.
Data. So I do think that it provides a little bit more space to be womanly rather than just mother. It's hard to switch from being like a walking napkin, nursing,
Wow,
circus.
I feel so seen in that. Walking napkin. That's 100% it. Oh my gosh.
It's really hard to switch from that to like an erotic woman. It does take some practice and coaching.
Yeah.
So I think that the I can work out of the house provides a whole place in the brain to think like, oh, I'm more than.
Maybe speak to that a little bit, because we have a lot of people listening who will feel and identify with exactly that and are asking, how do I switch to erotic wife?
Yeah. A lot of what I will tell. So for many women who have responsive desire, which is a lot of women, it does take cognitive arousal, thinking about sex, thinking about a partner before they're getting to a place of even wanting to engage sexually. And in order to do that, we know from research that context matters a lot. Your brain is constantly picking up on cues, telling you whether it's a good time to have sex or not a good time to have sex. And if the cues around you are dirty diapers and, smells like rotting milk shirts and all the things that come with motherhood, that's not going to be neurological cues that say, now's a fun time. Now's the time to go have sex, right?
Yeah.
So part of this really takes intentionality of building not only an external context of something that feels erotic to both partners, but an internal context. What stories are you telling yourself about your body? What stories are you telling yourself about your potential as an erotic woman and your rights to pleasure? For women who are mothers, in general, there is kind of an overarching theme that no longer do you exist for your own pleasure. You exist for the function and service of others. And to rewrite that can be really challenging. And it does take a lot of intentional planning. It can take a lot of therapy. Sex therapy is not just for couples. I work with a lot of individuals. In fact, that's the bulk of my caseload, just helping individuals create a sense of identity as an erotic person. For moms, I'll coach them to get sleep, hire a sitter, do whatever you have to do in order to feel rested, because if you're tired, you're not going to have as much fun. And then build a sexy bag. So I'll have moms build a bag of lingerie, toys, if that's their thing. I don't know if you can edit that out if that's not a thing for you guys.
No, that's good.
Like, I'll have some of them keep a journal and write their most erotic experiences with their partner that can elicit fantasy for them. Anything that is very unique to sexy time, certain perfume that is only used for sexy time, makeup if they want, all in a little sexy bag that only comes out as for the transition period into erotic moment. So that can help cue the brain that we're moving into this space, both through fantasy and storytelling, which women need, but also through building a context of like, okay, I can switch gears. I'm not a walking napkin. Now I am a lover. And that can be both tangible and intangible. So that's some of what I teach folks.
That's a great like practical step.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because we see this a lot in the Facebook group where, like, even yesterday there was a post about a husband. He's like, how do I get my wife to even think about sex? Because we have a great sex life. We both have high levels of satisfaction. We both orgasm every time. The sex is great, but there's no lead up because it's just not on her mind throughout the day. Like, what would you say to that wife or that relationship?
Yeah. Well, she's not going, I mean, first of all, I might have commented on that. Every season of life is not meant to be marked by wild monkey sex is kind of my go-to phrase. So you're 2 weeks postpartum, even 9 months postpartum, like maybe this isn't the time. So, and that's not just for postpartum people. That can be all along the lifespan for different reasons. But so taking the pressure off a little bit and maybe getting curious or just flexible around thinking about the season, and maybe it's just a season and that's okay. Additionally, I start depending on the couple, but with a lot of men, like, okay, what are you doing around the house? How can we reduce mind share kind of stuff? How can we add some partnership in the mental load? Because that we know from research can lead to less ability to think about sex just because there's less time. It can get tricky when working with couples because for some people, they misinterpret that as a tit for tat. Like, okay, he's going to do the dishes. This is totally chore play and we're going to go to the bedroom, when that's not it at all. It's not just that he's taking the trash out or doing the dishes or changing a diaper. It's that's a sign to her that she's not alone and she needs to feel less alone and partnered with. And so I think that it's hard. You can't make somebody think about sex. Also, they're not going to be thinking about sex that's not fun or good. So nobody wants bad sex. And maybe it's just getting mundane, right? So I think that it's really hard to answer that question when you don't know all of the background and all of the history. But I do think that part of what we're doing, part of what you guys do is change the story of like, no, this is something we have to be intentional about. It's not something that comes naturally. We like to think sex comes naturally because kind of that's what purity culture told us it would. We like to think motherhood will come naturally. And let me tell you, it does not always come naturally. Breastfeeding does not always come naturally. There are a lot of things that we have been told come naturally that don't. And so part of that could be just the intentionality of, okay, I need to set an alarm for today at lunch and I'm going to think about sex for 1 minute. Be really intentional about thinking about sex with your partner to kind of prime the brain a little bit for what could be coming. But those are my general thoughts, Kyle, for that particular situation. And he can't.
No, absolutely. I love that response.
It's interesting too, though, like coming out of purity culture, that may even be a big thing to think about sex, right? To be like, okay, I am allowed to think this way. I am allowed to fantasize. There's boundaries within stuff, but, even just taking that first step and learning how to do that without feeling guilty or shame.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a dynamic process because it requires grounding, like being able to be in your body, feel your feet on the floor, noticing your 5 senses, while practicing things that your nervous system has registered as threatening in some way, like fantasizing about your partner. Because for a lot of folks during adolescence, they were told that is sinful.
Yes.
And so it registered as dangerous to their system, which is not bad, but like,
Yeah.
it takes work to get around that.
Yeah. It's wild how so much of just like thought or ways of being taught are impacting like the physical later on in life. It's wild, but makes sense. So what are some practical ways couples can rebuild that emotional safety and trust in their sexual connection if purity culture has caused distance for them?
Yeah. I mean, outside of couples work with a trained therapist, I think using a lot of curiosity over judgment, noticing if their partner's in a different place, having that open and ongoing listening ear is going to be really helpful. For folks who do express like, gosh, I think I did an example on my TikTok or Facebook or Insta, one of the socials recently, where it talks about what it might look like to have an attuned response as a partner. If your wife says, or your partner says, like, I just always feel so guilty every time we go to have sex, rather than saying, oh, it's fine, we're married now, or kind of, trying to fix it or get rid of it, acknowledging like, oh my gosh, I can see this is so hard for you. You're still working through that. That has to be so challenging. I'm sorry you're going through that. Do you want to talk more about it? Rather than like, and that goes both ways, because not only men like to fix things, women can do that too. But just noticing, attuning, and getting curious rather than fixing and being judgmental would be kind of my lead ups. And then, I mean, I know therapy is expensive. Books are less expensive, and there's a lot of good ones out there. There are also a lot of bad ones out there. So following, great podcasts like this one and people who you align with theologically that feel supportive, and find out what books they recommend and lean into them, because there are some really great resources. I don't know if you guys support Bare Marriage, but they have some great books out there too, like She Deserves Better and Great Sex Rescue and some of those books. So they're resources.
Yeah.
I got one more question.
Yeah.
So in light of your research and everything you learned, it's a big question, but what needs to change? What should be done differently so that we have more people not in the low and more people in the high?
Sexual education needs to change. There needs to be less rigidity in sexual education and more cognitive flexibility. And then there needs to be more lifespan written into sexual education, so that we're learning about bodies and sexual functioning across the lifespan, not just in relation to adolescence or in relation to motherhood or in relation to menopause, but all of it. I started talking to my daughter about periods and menopause when she was like 5, because I want her to know, these are all normal things. These are how bodies bloom and how they change over time. And they're all normal and all beautiful and all okay. So normalizing all of that. And then allowing, and this can be controversial, but allowing men and women, boys and girls, access to the same material. I'm a trauma therapist by trade, so I'm working a lot with folks who have been through sexual trauma or have been violated in pretty significant ways throughout childhood. And so much of it, not all of it, but so much of it boils down to really normal, natural curiosity. And I wonder if we were to host, really, and many other countries do this successfully and have less problems, at least in the US, being able to talk through like differences between bodies. All bodies are good. All bodies move through different seasons, normalizing that up front throughout the lifespan, and then including both partners in intentional sexual education at the postpartum season, I think could be really, really helpful. It's a natural season where we're coming to contact with a lot of different systems in the medical community. So it would be really easy to access and provide that in that season.
Okay, I lied. I have one more question.
So for the couple,
if someone right now who's listening is pregnant or is in the postpartum period, what would you say to them? Like, what should they, either if they're pregnant, what should they as a couple be preparing for, and how should they be preparing? Or if they're postpartum right now, like, what are some practical things they could be doing to have a more successful postpartum period?
It is my belief that all postpartum women need to be in pelvic floor PT. I think that that's really, really important, whether there was pelvic floor injury or trauma or not. And many pelvic floor PTs will say they actually enjoy and would appreciate women coming in earlier than later, like during pregnancy, actually. Some things might be able to be mitigated and taken care of early on. So I would say this is a great opportunity. Your brain is primed to learn new ways of being and thinking, and use it as a springboard for healing is what I would say to pregnant couples listening. There are resources out. I wrote a book called Baby Moon and Beyond that I walk couples through specific conversation starters. And I know the Gottmans have one. So there are other resources out there too, but having intentional conversations of like, okay, what are we going to do if one of us is in the mood and one of us isn't? Thinking in advance about the postpartum season, and maybe even hearing and learning, especially if this is a first pregnancy, about some potential postpartum challenges that might happen. Nobody tells you like, hey, you're going to lose your hair, and hey, like, here are some things that can happen. And so a lot of women feel like the
hair is everywhere. That's the worst.
So hair is everywhere. It's the worst. It's the worst. Nobody tells you these things.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say to a pregnant individual or couple.
So for the couple listening who's feeling like a bit defeated because of the effects of purity culture, what are some like hopeful next steps that they could take from here?
I just think it could be so helpful for them to find, and I know you guys have partnerships and can provide access to sound sex therapy for couples. I think that could be really important to make it, to normalize and create spaces where there's intentional dialogue around sexual health, to keep it fun, to promote individuality in the partnership, to give yourself permission to try new things, fun things, even if it feels a little scary. Practicing curiosity over judgment is always my answer to most things. But they're more than welcome to email me, or I'm sure you guys, and we can help connect them to resources as well. But it can get so much better. The Lord didn't create marriage for things to feel rotten and bad.
Yeah. If people want to connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
My socials probably at Pearl in Process, or they can email me at ashleypearlinprocess@pearlinprocess.com.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So helpful.
And we should link your book.
Yes.
In the show notes and stuff too.
I can
more interested in that.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Perfect. Cool. Well, thank you so much for chatting with us today, Ashley. It was so interesting to hear all of that, the research, and it is fascinating. So thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
That was amazing.
Thank you for having me.
Would you be comfortable closing us off in prayer?
Yeah, let's do it. Father God, thank you so much. Just thank you for this ministry. Lord, I pray for Elena and Tiara and Kyle that you would just continue to bring them together in unity and peace as they move through this ministry and carry out the purposes you have for them in this ministry. And Lord, I pray for every listener that those whose ears fall on this message would find hope, God, that they would be walking away with tools and real life tangible ways that they can help themselves and their partners experience more satisfaction and pleasure and love in the ways that you designed it to be enjoyed, Lord. And we pray, God, that you would go before us and behind us. And we pray all of these things in your name.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Hey friends, thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you like our content, please review, and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts, and tell your friends too. Thanks so much for journeying with us today as we tackled the hard questions and dive deep into godly intimacy. Make sure you follow us on Instagram to see more of our content, and check the show notes for any links we might have mentioned in today's episode. We're so grateful to be on this journey with you, and we can't wait to see you in the next episode.